Marseille or the Rue de la Paix or some faraway archipelago. Nah, they go to San Diego. Dandy, San Diego, where the sweet perfume of the waterfront fills the air.
Do you live in a city? Chances are you do, or that you will soon. By mid-century, 70% of the planet's population will live in cities. A truly dramatic shift in human civilization. I'm Chad Vanderveen, editor of FutureStructure. I recently spent a few days at the Smart Cities Now Forum, hosted by the Smart Cities Council, Qualcomm, and the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. The event took place in beautiful San Diego on the Qualcomm campus. I caught up with Qualcomm Senior Director of Business Development, Kiva Allgood. Kiva and I had a terrific and wide-ranging conversation about all things smart city. Transportation, connected vehicles, energy, open data, wireless communication, and more. If you're interested in how the private sector thinks about smart cities, keep listening.
But just the fact that large cities, they have a big portion of their population that do not even own cars.
Yeah.
And that concept, especially I think in California and some of the other areas, is unimagiable to people. Like they just don't even, what do you mean you don't have a car?
Yeah,
like,
how do you get anywhere? Yeah. It's impossible.
I take public transportation. And it is interesting, I have a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old son. We were in Boston not last summer, but the summer before for a wedding, and I said, okay, we're going to do everything but by public transportation once we got to where we were at. They're like, what? Like, why would we do that, Mom? Why don't we just drive to MIT? I'm like, because there's a bus, and it costs $1.
Well, see, I always find that interesting. I was actually in Boston last week, but it's like if you look at New York or Boston, and then you look at like the metro in LA or the trolley system here, or even especially up in Sacramento, it's like those systems on the East Coast, they go into these little ancillary areas of the city.
Yeah.
The systems here kind of only go where they can, not necessarily where they should.
Yeah.
And so, and it's just a factor of not having built the early infrastructure the right way the first time.
Well, and also if you think about just how people migrated in the United States, so the last frontier was here, other than maybe San Francisco and some of the others that became ports. But transportation is one of those very interesting things, and I think, as cities, you've seen all the stats, but, 70% of the population is going to live in the city by 2050, so what implication does that have, like, for cities like San Francisco? Can that same small, dense area, which is already very heavily populated, have 2 million more people in it? And the answer is it will. So then what are the city services and the things that you have to do? And they're starting to really look at some of the European regulations and things that they've been able to do to make cities more walkable. So, and that a lot of that implies that you don't let cars in. Mm-hmm. So you have those concentric circles that all of a sudden that circle is about this big where no cars are allowed here. But then the next thing you know, that gets bigger and bigger, so then that implies you have to have some type of multimodal transportation across those different spaces. So
yeah, and I think London does something like that, where it costs you to bring a car, and is it?
London has a fee.
Copenhagen that's trying to be the car-free city.
Yeah, Norway has almost all of Denmark. I think you pay an extended fee, but they also track cars differently. I mean,
and they also have that infrastructure that gives you the alternative. Like, we couldn't do that here, because then you'd be like, well, you really actually can't get anywhere.
I'm not going to work today, unless you ride a bike. And even then, even here, for me to ride a bike to work, I'm not in good enough shape to actually get from there, because we've got so many big hills. So I'd be like hoofing it.
See, no one ever takes that into account. It's like really flat in London or in Paris. There's no hills. No,
you're not going up like a 50% incline to get to work. But they do a great job on the
And I think
vehicles.
I think about cities like kind of tier 2 cities. You mentioned we always things like this. It's always San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, New York, the big cities. But I think that the smaller cities, I don't know that they fully realize that 70% is going to happen in those places too.
Yeah.
It's not just the big cities. So, what are any thoughts on how those tier 2, tier 3 cities need to start reimagining how they think of their city, the infrastructure services they offer.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of actually Charlotte, Envision Charlotte, so where the next event's going to be, they started with policy and energy. So any building, I think it's over a certain specified square footage, has to provide its energy information into a public. Yes, yeah. Which, it's like ultimate crowdsourcing in a building, and next thing you know is your neighbor is using more energy than you are, so then they feel bad, and then they start to actually make changes, and it has positive reform. So I actually feel that some of the smaller cities can move faster because the mayor and the citizens have more control. It's not so politically bound by strife. Mm-hmm. So I think there's actually more options there. I think they have to be more creative in the funding. So if you think about even some of the partners that are here at the Smart Cities Council, they're willing to fund or help fund a big project in an LA or New York or something or someplace like that, because then that gets them the kudos and the press and the coverage and things they need to help offset that, even if it's a small project, because they want to get a bigger project or a bigger contract with the city. Where in a Charlotte, they're never going to have enough work. They're not going to have a $10 million 911 project.
Right.
So how do you entice some of the partners? And I think that a good part of that is providing open data and then inspiring innovation independently within those cities. So how do you get your own workforce or attract in people who want to provide those services, and you're not looking for the big corporations to do so, you're looking for more innovative solutions. And I think that's a unique way that they can collaborate. I also think they, and this is something the councils of mayors, and we've been talking with them about, is there's some use cases that if you were to get 10 of those together, become extremely attractive. So the crowdsourcing app that we showed in our video, which is someone finding graffiti and then sending it in directly to the construction worker, not through some complaint system, and then you get to track that. Public Stuff is a company out of San Francisco, and they have a great app that's been deployed in around 200 different cities that allows for that type of thing. I found a dog, and it's crowdsourcing plus city services, but it has a customer service element to it. So you're actually, as a city, thinking about the people who live there as your customers, which I think most municipalities do feel that. But the hard part is, how do you afford some of those tools in a smaller venue? And I think the advent of innovation by providing open data and smartphones allows for that. But I do think that potentially on some of the larger, to get a big vendor or a big partner interested, it's going to take 4, 5, 6 of them to actually come together.
Yeah, but you're right there. There are little things. Like, I think San Francisco is they're a good example. They were one of the first to use 301 for Twitter, so you could tweet your whatever and actually get a response from a human being.
Yeah.
And I think people that care about that sort of thing, whether or not you get the right answer, the fact that someone actually answers you is the most important thing. Yeah. So let's go talk about Qualcomm a little bit. I think, I could be wrong, but most people probably don't realize Qualcomm is involved in the smart city space. Mm-hmm. How long have you guys been doing that? What is your vision for the smart city?
A lot of people don't know Qualcomm, actually. So we'll start there. True. A lot of times people think, oh, you work at the stadium. No, I do not. I do not sell beer. For us, we succeed via our partnerships and collaboration partners. So strong heritage and innovation. Obviously, people who do know us, they think of us as, the grandfather of smartphones.
Right.
And we've basically taken that same core strength and extended that beyond just a smartphone. So we're number one in Wi-Fi chips as well. So majority of the routers and Wi-Fi and TVs is also Qualcomm technology. Bluetooth is another product, and we firmly feel that we've been active in the space, but via our partners.
Yeah.
But now we really feel that it's part of our role, similar to when we launched CDMA, to help cities and city planners and infrastructure planners really understand how can they build a sustainable city, how can they repurpose infrastructure in a different way. 10 years ago, I think you heard Lori say, this didn't do much, now it does everything.
Yeah.
You think about a light fixture in the same context, you start to have that conversation with the city manager, and they get excited, and the city planner. Now, again, we don't typically sell services to cities, so they tend to like when Qualcomm shows up, because we give them a very technically neutral evaluation of some of the things that they're considering. We're not selling them this box with this in it, and that for them is reassuring, because they, as Bev said yesterday, they don't know, and they're not engineers, and they're believing the vendors that come in. So we also have started providing some training on just all the different technologies and what do they really mean and how do they interact, because as more people come into any environment, whether that's a big city or a small city, the ability to connect and communicate is going to become more complicated, because they're going to interfere with each other. Mm-hmm. And planning for that up front is super important. And that's the role that Qualcomm likes to play, is, the technical advisor, really helping the cities and the municipalities think through what's my vision in 10 years? How do I want these things to work together? And then making sure they have the infrastructure, the core capabilities thought through, so that you don't have a proprietary network over here that won't ever work with this network over there. So then all of a sudden now you have fire and police that can't integrate, or you have lighting and police that can't integrate. And a lot of the work that a lot of the partners at the Smart City Summit here have already done is, they're instrumenting specific things.
Yeah.
We're trying to say that you have to think about it beyond just the instrumentation, down to the workflow system and the work management system, and having the cities do things smarter, and deploying, the maintenance guy, instead of him going through his checklist of boom, 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 he goes to the things, because it shows up on his phone, that are already broken. And, they're more predictive, or it's about to fail. So it's an integration into all of those different spaces, I think, for us. Now, we've always been very present with the GA organizations, and the policymaker side, but now we're really feeling it's important for us, because infrastructure only goes in once.
Yeah. Ideally.
Yeah, literally. And there's a lot of those things. There's 250,000, light posts in Chicago, and they all need to be upgraded. And if you instrument those with environmental sensors and small cells, you've solved 3 problems, not 1. And that for us is super important.
And for you guys, does that carry over into transportation and the connected vehicle space? Because to me, that seems like you talk about infrastructure only going in once. This is a chance to sort of put a new layer on top of an existing infrastructure that could really radically change things.
It can. I mean, if you talk to a city planner or a city manager, one of their biggest issues still today is detection.
Yeah.
Detection of people, how many people, and detection of vehicles, how many vehicles. I mean, that's why you still see the people with the little clickers clicking everywhere, and you're like, what the hell? Why are we there? Especially when you take a city of LA and they have, 7% of the population has a cell phone, so they could actually anonymously take that information, and that would probably be a lot more accurate than the guy clicking the clicker. So, I think knowledge is power, and I think cities are now starting to realize that they need this information. And I agree, the infrastructure, especially on the transportation side, DSRC is going to help. You saw the demo, the car demo yesterday? That's also just a great way to count how many vehicles are going through which intersections at which time.
More knowledge.
Yeah, and whether it's done with a 3G chip or whether it's DSRC, it gives you more information for rerouting and more information for city and civic planning. It could help with census data for 311 services. I mean, there's just so many different implications. But I think for cities it scares them a little bit, because they're already thinking, I don't have enough people to do what I've been asked to do today. And that's where I think we have to help them understand that they're not going to do what they're doing today. It's going to be transformative. They could be doing something different. Instead of driving the truck to find the pothole or the graffiti, that's all going to be crowdsourced. So all they're going to be doing is making sure that it gets fixed.
Right.
So it's a transformation of the work. But you say that to some of the workers are like, well, no, my job is to answer the phone and take the complaints. And it's like, well, actually now your job's going to be make sure that things got fixed. And that's okay. That's a good thing. But I think that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sure you've heard this all the time. It's usually not a technology problem. Typically is a people problem or a culture problem.
People, workflow, process.
Yeah.
Those are the big issues. Funding, I say, falls into the bucket too.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
money,
especially for governments.
Yeah. We just, we're working on a project in New York City called, as part of a joint venture called City Bridge, and we're looking to really transform the cityscape by taking out all the old payphones, which mostly don't work, and and putting in interactive kiosks that will provide phone service, 311 service, as well as other services for the city and gigabyte Wi-Fi. And those are the projects where, from my perspective, that is very forward. Not only just from a policy perspective, because now you've got the capability to consolidate a lot of infrastructure that's been all over the place into a single unit, but it looks better and it's self-funding. So advertising is going to pay for the gigabyte connectivity, and you've got other cities that have launched, San Francisco, that have launched free Wi-Fi, but very quickly the CFOs realize, well, who's going to start paying for all this stuff? And the splash page, and then you have monetization, and then the throttling. Citizens then complain about that, and so who's going to answer the phone calls? And it becomes a lot more complex than you think, because people complain when they had connectivity and don't have connectivity, or they had connectivity and it's not quite so good. So as soon as you provide it, managing it and taking it away are pretty complex.
That reminds me, there's some stand-up comedian he does this joke about Wi-Fi on planes, and it was working, and then it went down, and the guy next to him freaks out, and he's like, this didn't even exist a month ago. Yeah. And you had it and you lose your mind when it goes away. Yeah. And people are like that. It's now we have this, and now it's not working as well as we thought, or so we have our privacy is being violated.
Yeah, we have a partner in New York, and they're doing the installation of the extension of cell coverage in the tunnels, and they had to take it down to do an upgrade, and they had more calls and complaints about that than they had the entire year, just the 1 week that they had taken it down. And they're like, because people get conditioned to having it. Sure. And then once they don't have it, then, they don't complain that much when they don't have it in some instances. But then as soon as they have it, and then it's gone. Right. You're taking something away. It is, all bets are off.
Well, yeah, and that's what makes it so hard for government. If you provide a service and you ever need to scale it back, then you're really up against it if you try to do that.
Oh, you really are. And especially if it has to do with being able to answer your emails or watch your YouTube videos. Anger does come out. But Qualcomm's role there, we've got a long history of optimizing. If you think about how complex it is to have in any environment, millions of people on a cell tower, all doing different things, all trying to, you drop a call, people get upset. And so we've been able to work with the network providers to figure out how to make that work and conserve battery. And, now we just are applying that same skill and that same knowledge to an industrial application, which comes with its own complexities as well. But it's for us, it's a natural transition, and it's definitely a growth area. As our CEO, Steve Mollenkopf, mentioned on Monday night, it's an area of focus in both on the transportation side and smart city side. So,
yeah, I've heard it Qualcomm described as a company nobody's ever heard of, but you have one or more chips in everybody's house.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We do. And I think we are in the smart city space definitely trying to position ourselves as a technology advisor, because we aren't selling. We're not selling directly to the cities themselves. So.
Yeah, and we've talked to a lot of cities, and they all want to do this, but it's like,
where do I start?
Where do they start? Yeah. They can't afford the whole package. Some other companies will offer a giant smart cities. Yeah. We'll do it all for you, but Nobody can afford to do that.
Here's my $1 billion and a
right.
15-year service contract for $500 million a year. And actually, when I started really developing the strategy for the space, I spent a lot of time with the CTOs and CIOs in some of the smaller cities, just who are the partners that you trust, and who are how do you guys work? And 70% of all of the projects we just discussed are managed by system integration partners for the cities, because they don't have the skill set today. But I think that was a good discussion yesterday with some Bev and some of the city planners, is how do we now start to work with engineers and even tradespeople to get them thinking through these use cases and get excited about the transition that the cities are going through, and wanting to come work for the city,
right,
and wanting to help make those improvements, and making that a job of choice, not something to run away from. So I think that's something cities have to aspire to as well. So how do we, I think Dave Roberts said, the gray beards and the young ones. So it's the guy who's been running the sewage and sanitation system for 25 years, and you're going to automate it, and that guy's going to tell you everything you need to know.
Right.
And then you get to do the exciting part of upgrading it and doing it differently. And I think that's an important transition that a lot of municipalities and cities are going to have to go through.
Yeah, to me it's like, if you look back at the transition from the mainframe to the PC in government, it's a lot like that, just on a much larger scale.
Yeah. You're 100% correct. Well, and I think it's a little harder when you talk about infrastructure, because it's hard to rip up a road, and it's hard to redo a light. I mean, physical stuff. But that's even, if you think about park benches, if you think about trash cans, Big Bellies here, if you're putting in that city infrastructure, that the Big Belly has a 3G modem in it, and it could become a cellular hotspot. It could become a link and a connection point within your city infrastructure that provides more than just trash collection.
Right.
And people would never have thought of that 5 years ago. And a trash can that has more than one purpose, why?
Kind of reminds me of, you ever watch Alton Brown?
No.
On the Food Network. But he's a chef, and he always says, never ever buy a kitchen tool that only does one thing. Always buy something that has multiple uses. And that's a good way to think about it. If you're going to install any infrastructure going forward, make sure it does something else in addition to what it already is designed to do.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the cornerstone of our strategy. So the cornerstone in helping to educate people about the things that can be, and innovate around those. Because we're not water experts or energy experts or transportation experts, but we are experts in distributed networks and processing on the edge and connectivity. And we bring that expertise in for the team. So
that's good, because that's what it's going to take. The data is the key.
Well, it's what the data can inform.
Right.
I think that is the key. So it's the fact that the data can help shape the city's strategy, and I think that's super important. Now, the data by itself, without the analytics and the normalization, typically isn't
so useful.
No. We were talking to somebody who's like, I do not need the water project we were working on, and it sends 1 million data points, and they're like, oh my god.
Yeah,
so
what do I do with this?
Yeah, so it has to be normalized, and then you have to build a predictive model off of it, so you can really understand what the data is saying. And that can sometimes be done on the edge a lot of times. So then really what gets sent to the cloud is the actionable element, not all the data.
Well, and that's what your city leader is going to want. They want the data that's turned into something actionable. They don't need everything
just the
else.
rest. But there are some cities, and I would say that was a good start, so that where they just said, all right, let's innovate around this. Here's all my bus data. Here's where all the buses are at any given time.
Yeah.
And this is how fast it's moving. And all this information, you go have at it. And then you had some creative universities and schools that clustered around that information and actually did some great work. And so, I think from that perspective, it's a good way to kind of kick the can and get people looking at it. But it's not. There aren't a lot of computer scientists like the ones at Argonne Labs and other places like that.
Well, it's kind of like what Willie Brown was saying yesterday.
Yeah.
You have the ideas, then you get somebody else to do the work for you.
Yeah, he was fantastic, wasn't he?
That's hilarious.
He was so funny.
Very candid.
Yeah, well, the interesting part when we were putting together the agenda, and this has been a labor of love, because when I said, okay, we're going to do this event at Qualcomm, and we're going to do this, like half my team looked at me like I had completely lost my mind. And then as we started to come up with the agenda, they're like, oh my gosh, these are like is this going to be really boring? All these, city officials are going to sit up there, and I'm like, no, well, we're getting the good ones, the dynamic ones, the ones that are going to be candid and honest with the partners about what we need to do to be able to provide services to them so that they can actually become more intelligent or smart or futuristic or whatever word you want to use. And I think that we've been able to accomplish that over the last couple of days.
Yeah, the speakers have been really good. It was really nice to see some of that you got, not just San Diego and LA.
Yeah.
You got some Escondido and Fontana and Santa Ana, and some of the smaller mid-sized cities in between.
Yeah.
That was good. It's been really interesting.
Good. Well, I'm glad you were able to join.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. That's it for this edition of FutureStructure Radio. I'm Chad Vanderveen. Thanks for listening.
Dignitaries are on vacation from their land. If they want to live in the style they're used to, which they claim is very grand, do they go to Marseille or the Rue de la Paix or some faraway archipelago? Nah, they go to San Diego. Dandy, San Diego, where the sweet perfume of the waterfront fills the air.